Nora Whitfield liked to stay out of the limelight. It would have been hard for anyone who knew her to take. She felt at ease with herself and moved with a quiet confidence. She spoke quite precisely. She listened more than she talked, and people often thought she was somebody significant when she stepped into a room. Indeed, she was. Iris has been working as an FBI special agent for 12 years. She studied evidence till daybreak. She would go after witnesses who were afraid to talk. She would sit across from people who made their life by lying. She would learn to spot the tiniest holes in a falsehood. She had put dangerous people behind bars. Her reports had been utilized in federal courts. Her work was important, but it did not come to her this Tuesday morning. For the first time in months, she was not thinking about case files. She was not thinking about the corruption investigations. She wasn't thinking about courtroom testimony, family thinking. Charlotte, NC. Home dining room full of laughter, the smell of meals cooking at home, the sound of her nieces fighting over board games. I knew the sounds. I heard them a couple times every year. It was these things that mattered today. Her house was peaceful like a house at 5:45 in the morning. The silence before the morning. In the kitchen, a coffee maker ticked softly. It was still snoozing out there in the neighborhood. Inside, Iris was sitting at the table by herself with an open laptop in front of her. Another case folder, final check. It was a habit she could never completely conquer. She looked through the pages one more time. The screen sparkled in the dark. Names, pictures, proof. After months of work, here is a digital folder. She closed the laptop and took a gentle breath. The case was dismissed, for now at least. She would have been under continual strain for months. Deadlines, interviews, court sessions, random calls in the middle of the night. There were weeks she couldn't recall the last time she would have had dinner without checking her phone. Weeks of deliberate slumber. Weeks of unheeded idleness. Today was meant to be different. It was her day today. She stood up and went to her room. The morning light began to leak through the drapes. She unlocked the drawer near her bed. Inside was a little leather credentials holder. Her FBI identification. Her actual ID, a representation of everything she had battled for. Most individuals would have carried it with them everywhere. That would have been a source of pride for many people. Some would have worn it at every turn. Iris never did. She picked it up and gazed at it for a second. The gold badge gleamed in the warm light of the window. The badge had been one of the proudest moments of her life years ago. Her mother started crying. Her father smiled until his face hurt. The whole family had been partying. But the symbol eventually altered to something different. A tool, a weight, position, not an identity. She looked at it for a moment, then slid it back into the drawer, and she closed it. That single choice would matter more than she would ever realize. She didn't want to be Special Agent Fletcher this afternoon. She asked not to be identified. She didn't want a title to change how people regarded her. She just wanted to be Iris. A young girl, sister, aunt. A woman on a plane, on her way to Charlotte, NC, to spend the weekend with the people she loved, but she went for her purse, driver's license, credit cards, boarding pass. That was all she wanted. This was her idea. Her phone beeped. The computer flashed a name that I knew by Marcus Hale Cross, her supervisor. One of the few people who realized how hard she drove herself, she said. "Tell me you're really going to take the weekend off?" She smiled. "I am," he replied. "Fletcher, I mean it. I know. No email checking. All right, there are no reviews. Fine. No work outside of Charlotte, NC. She let out a laugh. "Bro, you are treating me like a suspect, 'cause I know you." His voice was softer. You needed this break, a period of silence from both of them. Not all chats are so chatty. Those who have worked together long enough know what is not said. Nathan knew what the last few months had taken from her. The tension, the weariness, sacrifices. And he knew another thing. Iris was not one to put herself in the first place. They hung up and she grabbed her carry-on, heading for the door. The drive to the airport was silent. The roads were almost desolate. Religious music played quietly from the speakers. The sun emerged, bathing the horizon in a golden light. Never for years had she felt so light as air. It was not because her life was simple. Her work was important, however. But she had let herself stop at last. We tend to think of strength as a steady forward movement, always in a conflict, always better than yourself. But strength looks a little different sometimes. Strength is sometimes a break for yourself. Take a breath. Just being who you are without the strain of everyone else's expectations. This morning, Iris felt something she had not felt in years. Freedom. She did not think of the questions until she arrived at the airport. She remembered her mother's food, family photographs about ancient stories that become funnier every year. Weirdly, she looked in her bag. Security check okay. Got to the gate. Another one of 10,000 wanderers. No badge. No title. No specific treatment. Just the way she wanted. They started climbing. Iris smiled and walked on serenely. She held a first-class ticket in her hand. The weekend with the family is waiting after the flight. She had no idea that at the end of this day, she would be confronted with a stranger's assumptions that would challenge everything she thought she understood about decency, respect, and the cost of keeping her lips shut. But now she was just a woman looking forward to getting home, and sometimes that is all a person wants to be. Nora Whitfield found her groove for the travel day, but across the airport, a different story was developing. It began in a spot that most passengers would never see. A pilot lounge hidden behind locked doors. No announcements of boarding. Sorry, no roller bags, no families posing for vacation pictures. Just coffee, flight schedules, and the folks responsible for moving hundreds of lives safely through the air. Exactly 6:18 a.m. Captain Charles Hargrove came through those doors. The room scarcely glanced up. It was not that they had not noticed him. He was known by everyone already. 22 years with the airline tended to make one familiar, especially in an industry where experience was sometimes considered currency. Charles Hargrove got his share. Thousands of hours aloft, international routes, recommendations for safety, plaques of appreciation, photographs exhibited at training centers. The airline believed in him. Junior pilots had respect for him. Managers rarely challenged him, and eventually something dangerous had happened. Bradley had started to believe his own publicity. Nothing evident about it, not in the way people think of pompous movie villains. It was a slow, gently, 1 year at a time, just one promotion at a time, one compliment at a time. That is, until he stopped asking himself one big question. What if I am wrong? That question has been gone from his life for years. His co-pilot for the morning, Ryan Castillo, was already at a table looking at weather forecasts. 34, aspirational. Still young enough in his job to remember what it was like to have to prove yourself every day. Bradley sank into the chair opposite him. Morning. Good morning, Captain. Derek flipped his tablet around. Weather looks good all the way to Charlotte, NC. Bradley nodded. Good. A couple of seconds elapsed. Then Derek pointed to the passenger manifest. Full flight. Bradley looked at the TV. Looks that way. First class is full. This caught the eye of Bradley. He moved a little closer. Business travelers? Some. Derek scrolled. Couple loyalty members. Couple of updates. Some travelers on holiday. Bradley made a noise that was halfway between a laugh and a scoff. Loyalty upgrades. Derek said nothing. He had heard that tone before. There was no tone for any single person, but it bore a message. A conviction. The thought that not everyone in first class really belonged there, continued Bradley. Half the folks in front do not know how to act anymore. Derek went on reading. The airline sells the seat. That's not the point. Bradley reached for his coffee, the experience used to signify a lot. Derek didn't answer, because he knew what a lot of younger employees learn quickly. Not all arguments are safe, even more so when the person you are disagreeing with controls your assessments, your schedules, and your career chances. Silence does not always mean agreement. Sometimes it is just self-preservation. A joke made another pilot laugh across the room. The television was quietly airing the morning news. Someone poured a coffee. The world continued. But Bradley's interest was again on the passenger list. Names, seat numbers, frequent flyer miles, specific requests, info. A lot of information, but not enough somehow. Bradley fell into a habit he would never admit to. Every time he saw a passenger list, he would envision it to himself. Who's in that seat? What are they doing? What is it they make? What is their dress? Are these theirs? Assumptions never stand up and proclaim, I'm an assumption. They come cloaked as experience, disguised as intuition, disguised as professional knowledge. The more you work in a career, the simpler it is to confuse pattern recognition with prejudice, and Bradley has been muddying that distinction for years, not because anyone taught him how, because he stopped pushing himself. He stopped doubting the stories he invented about strangers. The fables were facts in his head. At least they appeared to be facts. Aircraft rushed out from the gates through the lounge windows. Baggage trolleys wheeled across the tarmac. Just another normal morning. Bradley looked at himself in a nearby window. His uniform was immaculate, centered tie, pressed jacket, silver hair, well-cropped. Everything was perfect. He prided himself on it. He really enjoyed aviation in many ways. He respected protocol. He was a checklist kind of guy. He had regard for standards. What he didn't recognize was that he had ceased to apply the same standards to his own thinking. Aircraft systems were continuously inspected. Flight plans were continuously checked. Weather forecasts were being updated all the time. Yet somehow his own assumptions were left intact. Year by year, flight after flight after flight, and no one questioned them, including himself. The airline was focused on results. Flights departed on schedule. Passengers landed safely. Management saw a veteran captain. Management didn't always see the little events that happened. The gap between policies, the gap between reports. The instances that never made it into performance reviews. One look, a presumption, a decision, 3-second choice on someone he'd never spoken to. In those instances, there is no paperwork, no electronic records, no warning lights in the cockpit, but they form everything. Derek completed going over the weather briefing. We should head to the plane. Bradley stood up. Let's roll. Passengers swirled in all directions as they passed into the terminal. Business travelers, university students, retirement. Tired parents with tired children, vacationers, people filling them out, people having a party, people mourning. Every traveler with a narrative no one else can tell. Bradley did not think about that often. For him, most passengers merged into one, not as persons, as categories. And classifications are easier than curiosity. Curiosity has its work to do. Categories demand assumptions. Bradley looked towards the dining area as they neared the gate. There were plenty of passengers waiting to board. A few appeared excited. Others seemed tired. Some were looking at phones. Some stared out the windows at airplanes. And one of them was Nora Whitfield. But Bradley still did not know her name, didn't know what she did for a living, didn't know what her role was, did not know her sacrifices. She did not know how many years she would spend serving her country, did not realize she would decided to leave her badge behind that morning since she desired one rare weekend of normal life. He knew nothing about all this, and that was the point. For the most serious mistakes in life sometimes begin much before anyone utters a word. They start the instant someone decides they know who someone else is. Bradley stood outside the gate, straightened his jacket, and prepared for another regular flight. Trust, passengers would see. Power, professionalism, experience. But what they would not see was the fault creeping silently under it all. The surety. His belief that he was always right. The belief that his gut was never wrong. And somewhere a few yards away, Iris waited patiently for the boarding to start. Family time. Can't wait. To anxiously waiting for peace. Unaware that she had already stepped into the blind spot of a guy who had spent years mistaking confidence for fact. The flight hadn't even started, but the collision course was fixed. The boarding announcement sounded normal. Most do in life. A quiet voice came from the gate area. First-class passengers were invited to board. People rose. Phones vanished into pockets. Coffee mugs flew into garbage cans, carrying suitcases and rolling over the carpet. Nothing about the time seemed significant. There was nothing to suggest anyone would recall this flight years later. Nora Whitfield got up and went to join the queue. She looked at ease, lighter than she had felt in months. The stress of work seemed farther away with each step approaching the aircraft door. A businessman in front of her changed his tie. Behind her, an older couple talked about meal reservations in Charlotte. A young woman was scrolling through holiday images on her phone. Each one came into the jet bridge with unique hopes. Everyone was expecting a typical flight. Iris is included. The lead flight attendant greeted passengers at the airplane door, her warmth trained and professional. Good morning. Welcome on board. Have a good flight. The words were plain. But they added up. Travel has a way of making people vulnerable. The instant you board a flight, passengers forfeit control. They trusted strangers with their safety. They trust a crew they have never known. A grin, hello, a gesture of generosity. Those little things can be more important than people realize. Iris smiled nicely as she boarded the flight. The flight attendant grinned back. Welcome aboard. Thanks. Nothing special, no awkwardness, at least not for now. A few rows back in the cabin, Captain Charles Hargrove had started what many of the passengers considered a charming custom. He was a personal escort to travelers. Some airlines pushed it. It was frequently enjoyed by passengers. The sight of a captain coming down the cabin was reassuring. It made people feel noticed, made them feel secure, made them feel like more than a seat number. This was the part Bradley loved. He always did. It was nice to get noticed, about seeing the passengers' responses to the uniform. The respect, the power. He walked the aisles of first class, row after row. He smiled readily. He looked like a man who knew what he wanted. From an outside perspective, he appeared to be the perfect captain. A businessman in seat 1A stood and shook his hand. Good day for flying. It absolutely is, Captain. They laughed a little, together. One corporate attorney at row 3 set her laptop aside for long enough to say hello back. Bradley smiled. If you need anything today, just let us know. She thanked him. An elderly couple in similar airline loyalty jackets gave row 4 an extra hearty greeting. Bradley knew the brand. Status level acknowledged. Image confirmed. He chatted with them nearly a minute. Anyone who had seen him would have said he was a personable guy. Professional. Friendly. So he was then on row 2. And then something changed. Not much. The filing of a complaint is not enough to raise an alarm. Just enough to feel changed. The smile stayed, but there was no warmth. The eye contact was short. The vibe changed. Subtle, barely visible. The sort of shift that people sense before they can articulate it. Iris glanced up from the novel she had just opened. She expected the same welcome that everybody else had got. Same grin, The same welcome to you. Bradley stopped at her seat and posed a question instead. May I see your boarding pass? The request wasn't aggressive, not on the face of it. But that was strange, especially since he did not request anyone else. Iris passed him her phone. The digital boarding pass was readily visible on the screen. Name, flight number, reservation of seats, all way it ought to be. Bradley looked over it. He turned to gaze at her again. Do you have a hard copy? No. His eyes lingered a little too long. Not checking the boarding pass, checking her out. Measurement, doing the math. Evaluation, how some people examine a puzzle they think doesn't belong in the box. Seconds ticked by. Then he gave the phone back. No greeting, no handshake, no grin. Enjoy your flight, no nothing. He just walked away. Iris saw him head off towards the galley. Then she shifted her focus back to the book. At least on the outside. Inside was a sensation of familiarity, not a surety, not crazy, acknowledgement. Moments like this are rarely by themselves. They hold memories. A store clerk who'd stalked her up an aisle years ago. A hotel clerk who asked twice if she was staying there. A security guard who asked for ID while ignoring everyone else around her. None of those instances were spectacular. That was precisely what made them so difficult to explain. They may each be taken away separately. A misapprehension, chance, and accident. But the same coincidences kept happening again and again somehow, to the same kind of folks. Iris knew things that other people didn't. Human beings are great at rationalizing away discomfort. We tell ourselves we are only imagining it. We rationalize bad behavior because the other is tiresome. No one wants to live their life worrying if every encounter is laced with concealed judgment. So Iris did what she learned to do a long time ago. She saw it, and she remained calm. Bradley walked into the forward galley a few minutes later. Lead flight attendant Diane Schaefer was setting up service items before takeoff. Supply of coffee, glassware, passenger requests, the usual rhythm of getting up. Bradley's voice dropped. Not secretive enough to sound normal, the girl in 2A. Colleen looked at her tablet. And her? Bradley shrugged. Look at her. Colleen blinked. For what? One pulse? Teeny? Hardly noticeable. Then Bradley answered, just keep an eye on her. The conversation was over in less than 10 seconds. No fee. No explanation, no information, nothing to worry about, just an authority in the guise of a proposal, and that was what was powerful about it. Bias is thought to come in with a bang, but most of the time, it doesn't happen. Sounds plausible for the most part. Ambiguous, nothing special, a straightforward remark, a little instruction, a sentiment moved from one person to another, like smoke in a room. Colleen nodded her head. Not because she knew it, because Bradley was the captain, the supreme authority on the aeroplane. It seemed pointless to question him. Maybe even incorrect. So the instruction she took and went on. The difficulty was that preconceptions rarely stay where they start. They proliferated. Someone gets suspicious, then another. Soon everyone starts reacting to a tale that was never really established. In seat 2A, Iris flipped a page in her novel. Outside, the engines were starting to hum. Passengers took their seatbelts, snapped into place. Overhead bins are now shut. All seemed well. And there was the disturbing thing. Why? Because the earliest signals of unjust treatment seldom come as big occurrences. They come in silently, a lost smile. One more question, a longer glance. Another voice, a warning passed from one man to another. Small moments that feel small in isolation, until they start to create a pattern. And somewhere deep inside Iris could already sense the pattern starting. She just did not realize how far it was going to go. The plane finally began to push back from the gate. The terminal outside the window faded away slowly. The early sun gleamed off the adjacent airplane. The passengers settled into the usual rhythm of flying. Phones were set to airplane mode. Seat belts snapped into place. Conversations died down. Engines droned softly, ascending toward the skies, and filled the cabin. For most passengers on board, it felt like the start of an average trip. To Nora Whitfield, it still seemed so, at least for a time. Her head lay lightly against the seat as she glanced out the window. Below, the city grew smaller. Roads shrank to narrow gray lines. Buildings shrank into little shapes. There was something soothing about flying, that she was unreachable for calls for a few hours. No one was going to hand her another case file. Nobody could expect her to work out another problem. The sky had a way of making space from everything that was going on the ground. She liked the feeling. She had to have it. More had been drained from her in the last few months than she cared to admit. Friends generally imagined that FBI agents were brave, unstoppable, always in command. The reality was simple. Those who held responsibility frequently carried tiredness too. Iris knows how to maintain cool under pressure. She knows how to interrogate suspects. She knew how to provide evidence in court. What she did not always know was how to relax. That's why this weekend was important, not because of the end. The meaning of it, a chance to just be human, to have a chance to quit performing, a chance to stop bearing everyone else's expectations. A first-class service cart came in the aisle, pushed by a flight attendant. The premium cabin experience amenities were beginning to be served to passengers. Warm towels, champagne, warm snacks, just a little chat, the little amenities tourists shell out for. Row by row, service advanced. Everything seemed to be going well, professional, predictable, the way airline service ought to be. The businessman across the aisle got his drink. Row 3 attorney got hers. Retired couple laughed when the flight attendant joked with them. One by one, everyone was served. Everyone but Iris. At first, she did not give it much thought. Perhaps they were following a different order. Perhaps something slowed the procedure. Perhaps she had simply missed her turn. So she went back to her reading. A chapter went by. Then a couple more pages. The cart kept rolling. Champagne drunk by passengers surrounding her. Warm goodies permeated the cabin with their smell. The talk ebbed and flowed. Seat 2A stayed empty. Iris slowly placed her book down, not because she wanted to moan, because she wanted to know. Understanding was second nature to her now. Years of investigative work had made her detect patterns. The majority of people watch events. Sequences investigators see. Most individuals noticed what happened. Investigators have different ideas on what transpired. That distinction is important. She looked around the cabin. There was no one else waiting, it seemed. No one else got skipped. Everyone else seemed to be remembered. Finally, a few minutes later, flight attendant Diane Schaefer made her way over. Her grin was courteous, professional, yet conspicuously short. "What will I get you?" The question struck him as curiously unfinished. No champagne offered, no hot towel service mentioned, no reason. Just the question alone. "What can I do for you?" Iris halted. Sparkling water would be nice. Of course, Colleen came back with the water, put it down, and continued. The contact lasted less than 10 seconds. No animosity, sure thing, no obvious offense. Yet something was not quite right. Not from what occurred, by reason of what did not take place. People typically recognize exclusion long before they can prove it. We see missing parts, invitations missing, no grins, lost chances. The absence sends a message of its own. Iris glanced at the unopened bottle of sparkling water. She gazed round the cabin again. Everyone else had had the complete first-class experience. She had been given the bare minimum. Anyone else might have shrugged. Coincidence? A bustling gang. An oversight? Possibly. But patterns have a tendency of repeating, and Iris had already seen a couple of the first bits. The request for the boarding pass, the missing salutation, the odd look, the command to watch her, which she had not heard but was now beginning to feel through its results. None of them alone told a whole story. They began to make one together. The hard part was finding out what to do with that knowledge. Many people think unfair treatment leads to instant rage. Sometimes it does. More often it breeds doubt. You begin to ask yourself questions. Am I making this up? Am I being too sensitive? Did I forget something? Is there a different explanation? The mind does a lot of work to protect itself from painful conclusions. Any conclusions you have already reached in particular. Iris knew that sensation. She had known it all her life. Not every week. No, not every month. But enough times to know the draining mental haggling that occurs when reality and hope meet. It's a misunderstanding, Hope explains. Experience says maybe it isn't. She put the book down and drank some water, and then something interesting happened. The FBI agent inside her went back to work, quietly. Not in an official capacity, not knowingly. Sheer instinct. She focused. She looked at the seatback screen. She noted the positions of the crew. She observed the service patterns. She cataloged encounters. She did not intend to use the information, for observation was part of who she had become. 12 years of inquiries had altered the functioning of her brain. Details were important. Details always counted. The distinction between reality and fiction sometimes lay in the nuances. A witness remembers a color, a timestamp, a saying. A series, little facts become big truths. Iris began to establish a timeline without realizing it. Not a complaint, no report, just a record, a private one, the type she had for herself. Outside the window, the horizon was filled with clouds that extended on forever. Very nice, quiet. The very view she had been looking forward to seeing on this trip. But the early joy was giving way to a calm sorrow. Not because she had been insulted by someone, not because anyone spoke up. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. That was the most difficult aspect. She had bought her ticket. Every rule was followed. Be nice, respectful, cooperative, and that still somehow was not enough. Disappointment is understood by many people. Far fewer appreciate the special sadness of being singled out for reasons having nothing to do with your behavior. You feel invisible and hypervisible at the same moment. Invisible like a person, super visible as an assumption of someone else. Iris realized she could not control other people's thoughts. She learned that lesson long ago. She could manage herself. She was composed, her dignity, her answer, and so she took up her book again, flipped the page, and kept on reading, at least on the surface. Yet somewhere underneath the serene facade, a new story was beginning to develop, because the patterns seldom stop after the first few indications, and Iris didn't know it yet, but the following step wasn't going to be subtle. The subtle pain of the morning was about to become something no one in first class could ignore. Most people think they are secure at 37,000 feet. Not that they understand aerodynamics, not because they understand how jet engines function, but because they trust the guys in the uniform. Trust is one of the most precious things a human being can give to one another, and on Flight 1162 that confidence was about to be shattered. The cabin had found its comfortable rhythm at cruising altitude, soft light from laptop screens, pages flipped silently, ice tapped on glass. Somewhere in the main cabin, a baby had finally gone to sleep. For most of the passengers, it was just like any other flight. The nice folks forget in a few days. Iris Fletcher was in seat 2A, by the window. Her book lay open, but she had not read the final paragraph. Not much. In the past hour, she had seen a few minor items that did not quite fit. The late service, the absent salutation, the unusually long look she gave as she got on. None of it proved anything, though. None of it was dramatic enough to face. That was the frustrating part of moments like these. It was easy to rationalize each solitary act. A misapprehension. Wrong. A busy bunch. Coincidence. But when enough coincidences pile up in one spot, they cease feeling like coincidences. Still, Iris had made her choice. She would concentrate on her family. The reunion, the laughing in Atlanta, waited. She wasn't going to let one miserable flight steal her peace. Outside, the window clouds hid the horizon, bright white in the morning sun. Relax for a moment. Then a shadow fell across her seat. The door to the cockpit had opened. The captain was coming straight down the aisle. Not to the galley, not to another passenger. To her. A few travelers raised their heads, then returned to their phones. It was not uncommon to see a captain wandering through first class. But there was something about the way he stood, something stiff, conscious, as if he already knew how this conversation would end. He halted at 2A. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. "Ma'am," he said. There was enough authority in his voice to make neighboring passengers look up. "I'm going to need to see a government-issued photo ID." For a second, Iris believed she misheard him, not because the request was unfeasible, because that was weird. Unusual, really. She glanced around. No one else had been questioned about it. Not the businessman in the front row. Not the old couple. Not the lawyer on her laptop. Her alone. She closed her book gently. "May I ask why?" She responded quietly. The question wasn't aggressive. It was not defensive. It was all right. The kind of inquiry any traveler would ask. Tate's face went grim. "It's a security concern, you know. Security concern." The words were heavy, because everyone within earshot knew at once what they meant. Security issues are important. Action is warranted due to security reasons. People worry about security, and yet there was no real worry. No disruption, no complaints, no suspicious activity, no proof. Just an accusation, with no details. The cabin grew more silent. Humans are extremely sensitive to strain, even before they know what is happening. People knew something was up. Iris met his eyes for a second. Then she made the same decision millions of Americans have made in awkward situations. She obliged. Not that she agreed, because it is easier to argue than to solve, especially when there's authority in the mix. She fumbled in her handbag. She produced her driver's license and passed it over. She moved slowly and respectfully. No resistance, no attitude, no conflict, total cooperation. Tate took the license. For one brief second, a rational result was still feasible. He could see it. Check her ID. Give it back. Walk off. It may be the end of the moment, but instead something else happened. Something that would remain with every witness long after the flight was over. Tate looked at the license. Not learning it, not seeing it, just carrying it. He then stared directly at Iris. A weird hush fell in the cabin, the kind that occurs right before something breaks, and then it did. He ripped the license in half with a sharp crack. The noise was not loud in itself. Somehow it resonated all over the cabin. The passengers froze. A woman tilted her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. A man paused from typing. Someone yanked an earpiece out. For a beat, no one moved, no one spoke, because what they would just seen made no sense. A driver's license is not just plastic. It is its identity, evidence of existence. It's something people carry every day without thinking. And now 2 of them are on a tray table, destroyed by the one person passengers were trained to trust. Iris looked down at the ripped pieces. No movement, not a blink. Shock is frequently silent. Movies tell individuals that shock looks dramatic. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks just like that. A person sitting totally motionless because their mind is trying to figure out something that should never have happened. Then the words came. The comments that made a misuse of authority that much uglier. Tate leaned in, loud enough for barely a few rows to hear well, but loud enough for the word to go out. You folks constantly find a way to get into areas you don't belong. The sentence was in the air, toxic, purposeful, cruel. No one got the wrong idea of what he was saying. Since prejudice doesn't usually need an explanation, everyone knows it when it walks into a room. He kept on talking, each syllable peeling away another layer of dignity, another kind of respect, another layer of human. No answer came from the cabin, not because passengers liked it. They were stunned because people think they know exactly how they would react to injustice until they happen upon it. Then reality gets more difficult. Fear comes in, uncertainty creeps in, disbelief sets in, and stillness often precedes courage. Dozens of eyes drilled into her, and Iris could feel them. Some sympathy, some uncomfortable, some embarrassed. But none of those eyes burned as much as the realization that a man responsible for hundreds of lives had decided to wield his power in this fashion. Not to defend, not to be served, not to assure safety, but to shame, to reduce, to make another human feel less. Tate adjusted his military jacket, as if it were a normal thing to do, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He turned and proceeded back toward the cockpit, leaving a shattered silence behind and two torn pieces of plastic on a tray table. For the rest of us, it was the close of an unpleasant moment. It was the beginning of something so much bigger for Iris Fletcher, because some people respond to humiliation with rage, some answer with fear. But there are rare people that react by memorizing every detail. All faces, word for word, all the witnesses. A second one. And with the closing of the cockpit door behind Captain Bradley Tate, Iris was not thinking about revenge. It was the fact she was thinking about, because power can make reality look different for a moment, but proof has a way of bringing back reality. Soon or late, every time. Nobody moved for a good few seconds after Captain Charles Hargrove left. A strange silence descended on the cabin. Not the tranquil, placid quiet of an easy journey. Not the quiet drone of folks settling in after takeoff. This was something different. It was the hush of the shock. The silence that individuals make when they are trying to comprehend what they have just seen. First-class passengers looked down at their trays. Some looked through windows. Others feigned a return to their laptops. But it was in everyone's mind. What the hell just happened? Iris sat unmoving. Her driver's license, ripped into pieces, lay in her palm. She looked at them for a while and then quietly put them into her handbag. Her movements were sure controlled deliberately. To any spectator, she may have seemed unruffled, but the truth was more complex. Her years with the FBI had trained her to shut down her emotions, but immunity was not control. She was humiliated still. She was still disappointed. She still aches with the sting of someone else deciding who you are without ever knowing your story. The difference was that she had learned to not let someone else's actions take control of her own. The businessman who had spoken previously took off his glasses again across the aisle. He looked ill at ease. Not that he did anything wrong. He would have done too few. This is a sensation familiar to many respectable people. The realization that quiet can be a choice in itself. Before he could speak, another voice cut in. Soft, gagged, steady. Ma'am, Iris turned. An old man in a blue coat with glasses rimmed in silver sat 3 seats behind her. His face had the softness that some people only acquire with age, the type that makes strangers feel safe. He leaned forward slightly. I saw everything. The words were simple, but they weighed something. Because after an experience like that, most people do not need to be rescued. It is a decree, confirmation that what they had encountered was reality. They aren't imagining it. Someone else has seen it. Iris offered a small nod. Thanks. The man stretched out his hand. My name is Rev Thomas Whitaker. His voice was warm at a slow rate, the voice of someone who had listened to other people's misery for decades. Rev. Thomas Whitaker had pastored churches all around North Carolina for more than 40 years. He married folks, did funerals. She advised families at their saddest hour. And all those years he had learned something very important. People remember who came when situations became hard, not who stayed cozy, who stood by them. Reverend Graves looked at Iris. You haven't done wrong. He was not expecting such punishment, because deep down a lot of individuals who are treated unfairly start asking themselves questions. Perhaps I should have put it another way. Maybe I should have been doing something different. Maybe I did something to cause this. The human mind seeks reasons because uncertainty is unacceptable. But Reverend Graves took that load with one statement. You have nothing to be ashamed about. Iris felt a slight knot in her throat for the first time since the confrontation. Not because she was going to cry, for sometimes kindness will carry you where rage cannot. Thanks, Padre, he smirked, then sat back silently. He was not trying to be a hero. He did not wish to make a fuss. It just didn't seem right to be quiet. Another passenger a few rows behind had been observing all this with a startling passion. Teresadunlap 42. Partner in a prestigious Charlotte, NC law firm, she specialized in employment law, discrimination cases, workplace misconduct, corporate social responsibility. She knew documents inside out. Some were emotional, Teresa was professional. She would have seen timestamps, speak, locations, order. More details. Important? Her phone lay still in her lap. It had a few things in its notes app. Time of occurrence, words spoken, witness sites, captain makes his move, passengers answer. Not that she was going to get involved with this, for experience had taught her one thing. Memories disappear. Documentation remains. Teresa was staring at Iris, and he added another note. The passenger remained calm throughout the interaction. That was crucial too. Facts mattered, especially when the powerful told the stories. Meanwhile, Second Officer Ryan Castillo sat in silence behind the cockpit door, gazing at the flying instruments. That was the impression he gave. In fact, his thoughts had been wandering for minutes. He would have heard most of the confrontation through the half-open cockpit door. Not every one of them. Enough. Enough to know something was seriously wrong. Derek stared at the instrument panel. Height, quick navigation, all looked fine. But his focus was still on the cottage. He knew Bradley. Had flown with him a few times, honored him. I got that from him, trusted him. But what he heard today didn't fit the professional captain he thought he knew, and that scared him. It created a conflict that many people will have to deal with in the end. When loyalty clashes with conscience, what happens? It is obvious what the basic remedy is. Opt for conscience. In real life, it is rarely that straightforward. Bradley was a creature of timetables, performance reviews, employment opportunities, recommendations. The aircraft world turned out to be very small. They were conversing. Reputation was tallied. Derek knew what danger lay in speaking out, but still another idea would not leave him alone. And supposing no one does? The question sat heavy on his chest. Flight attendants continued to work outside the cockpit. The passengers started talking again. The looks were slowly getting back to normal, but something vital had altered underneath. No more classes in the cabin. Or seat assignments. It had ripped a different way, between those who felt wrong. And what they chose to do next, Iris felt it as well. She could feel how people looked at her now, not suspiciously so. Anxious. Mood was different. What Bradley had succeeded in doing was the absolute antithesis of what he would have planned. They had made witnesses, not isolated her. Humans tend to underestimate witnesses. People remember history and history evolves. Justice is when someone writes what took place. Truth endures because someone refuses to blink. Iris knew that better than anyone. Average citizens deciding to tell the truth was all it took for whole FBI investigations to go down the drain. Not extraordinary people. Regular people. The nice ones are sitting in airplane seats. They enjoy reading books. The kind going back home. The kind who find themselves suddenly in the center of someone else's story. She looked around the cabin again. Rev. Graves's note-taking by Teresa's light. Witnessed travelers exchanging nervous glances. The flight attendants acting like all was well at the locked cockpit door. She took a breath. Slowly. It was not a torn driver's license anymore. No more humiliation. Something greater came up. That's a record, a multitude of witnesses, a chronology, a fact that now lived in many of minds, not one. And that made all the difference. Power is often about controlling the narrative, but reality is a lot harder to deny when other people begin carrying it too. It was the first time since the flight had begun that Iris felt new. No anger, not scared, not even the grief, transparency. The kind of investigators you come to trust, the sort that clicks as the pieces start to fall into place. And somewhere out ahead of her, beyond the clouds and beyond Charlotte, NC, she knew one thing for sure. But the narrative was not finished yet. The wheels thumped softly as they hit the runway. Some passengers clapped quietly. Somebody pulled out their phone. Outside the windows, Charlotte, NC spread out under a blue afternoon sky. For most of the people on board, the flight was over. It would be a work trip, and then the family vacation would start. A weekend reunion was coming. Life went on. But Nora Whitfield had a feeling that the narrative was merely beginning its next chapter. The aircraft taxied to the gate. The passengers collected their things. The overhead bins pop open. Gradually, the talk resumed. The cabin was packed with the usual commotion of arrival. But below it all, there was an unpleasant tension. People remembered what happened. No one said anything about it aloud, yet they remembered the driver's license, torn. The allegations. Silence. The eyewitnesses as the passengers started to get off. Iris stayed seated. She was not exactly in a rush, for experience had taught her a great lesson. People expose themselves most vividly after they think an episode has ended. That is when mistakes were often made. That was usually when the truth appeared. A few rows forward, she was watched by Reverend Rev. Thomas Whitaker. Their eyes locked for a moment. He gave a little nod. Good people exchange when words are unneeded, and so did Monica Reyes. The attorney had kept noting observations throughout the rest of the flight in a muted fashion. Names, times, activities, more info. The flight might be over, it would not record. Some minutes later, passengers started to disembark through the forward entrance. One by one, they disappeared into the jet bridge. Iris got her purse and stood up. A voice interrupted. "Ma'am, please hold on a second." The statements were said by a gate agent who was standing near the aircraft's entrance. The request was gracious, yet, beyond doubt, several passengers nearby froze. Some stared at Iris right away. Others glanced into the cockpit. Everybody knew what was up, but the scrutiny was not over. Iris sank down again gently. Of course, none to argue. No opposition, nothing dramatic. The gate agent was taken aback by the answer. The innocent tend to get defensive when targeted. Most guilty individuals get defensive too, but Iris just stayed cool. For the most peaceful people, sometimes are the hardest to manipulate. 10 minutes later, the cabin was practically empty. There was only a few of the team left. Then 2 men in airport security uniforms walked on the plane. They seemed serious and businesslike. Neutral. Not antagonistic, not friendly. Just doing the job. One cop stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to check some information before you go." Iris nodded. Naturally, the officer looked really relieved. "Thanks," he sat across from her. "Captain Tate has a few questions about your ID." And there it went. The tale had proceeded exactly as she had anticipated. Not because she could see the future, because she knew the human nature. People who make severe mistakes typically double down on them rather than admit them. The simpler thing is to defend the lie than to face the truth. The officer went on. "He said there were inconsistencies regarding your identity." Iris cocked her ears. Every syllable counted. Discrepancies. Identity. Concerns. Funny language. Very particular. Very formal. Very helpful. Without any emotion, she opened her wallet. The broken driver's license was still in it. Still conflicted. Still not usable. The officer's eyes grew a little bigger. "What has happened to this?" Someone raised the obvious question. For the first time, not charged, asked. Iris answered simply. The captain ripped it up on the flight. The officer blinked his eyes. He thought for a second he must have misheard. "He did what?" Then another voice spoke behind him before Iris could speak. "I saw it." Everyone watched. Reverend Graves was waiting beside the airplane's exit. He had not been gone. Monica Reyes hadn't either. The attorney walked forward. "I saw that as well." The officer's face changed quickly. This was not a straightforward verification anymore. Witnesses were coming out. Independent witnesses, that was important, a lot. It took minutes for the scenario to start falling apart. Airport security scrutinized how Iris got on the plane. Everything fit together. Her grip, her payment info, herself, her travel record. All the systems said the same thing. Nope, valid, confirmed legal. No inconsistencies found. No cheating, no issues with security. Nothing, not a thing. And cop quietly went away to make a phone call. The other looked through more records. 2 minutes later, he looked back at Iris. There was no more skepticism. Professional civility. It all adds up. The words cut deep, which didn't surprise Iris, because it showed what everyone already knew. No fresh facts were coming out of the probe. It was unmasking an ancient deception. Some crew members glanced at each other anxiously nearby. The atmosphere had shifted again. The room was once governed by authority. Facts were beginning to take over now, and facts are unpleasant, especially those who know more than they say. When the security officials were done with their inspection, Iris saw something more. There was no sign of Charles Hargrove. The man who had spoken so confidently on the air was bogged down in processes and reports. The observation remained with her. There will be witnesses there, and accountability then is hard. One officer returned with more documents. "We regret for the inconvenience." It was a real statement. Most people would have taken it and departed. A lot of them would have gone to baggage claim, towards the family, back to the normal life. For a moment, Iris pondered doing just that. Her mother waited for her. Her nieces waited for her. Waiting was the weekend she needed so badly. She may have left, cancel the flight, drop the shame. Forget the ripped permit, drop the charges. A lot of people would. And who could blame them? Because battling unfairness is tiring. It takes time, strength, patience, documenting. Most importantly, it forces you to relive things you would rather forget. But Iris had thought of something else. Not her. The next rider in line, the person who could be in that seat tomorrow, or next month, or the year after. A lone witness, a person without papers, someone who might doubt himself later on, someone no one would ever believe. It was a thought that transformed everything. Justice had never been personal to her, and that is why she became an investigator. There was no thought of revenge ever. The point was to be held accountable. That is not the same thing. Iris gazed at the security guard, then at the witnesses who had remained behind, then at the damaged license in her hand. Finally, she spoke. She kept her voice quiet. Sized, professional. I want copies of all the reports on this incident. The mood was altered immediately by the request. It was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a grievance, not an awful travel experience anymore. This was beginning to be a record. Official records. Kindness lasts longer than discussion. The cop nodded. We can give you the incident number. I would be thankful. We'll write it down. Understood. The word counted more than anyone could know. Because truth is a far more difficult thing to delete once it enters a system geared for preserving facts. Iris took the papers and there was a change within her. Not rage. No vengeance. Objective. The same aim that had carried her through 12 years of research. The same aim that had taught her to be patient. The same objective that comprehended a simple rule. The answer is not more authority when people misuse authority. Proof is the answer. And as she walked off the plane in Charlotte NC, one thing was very evident. Capt. Charles Hargrove felt the flight was finished. Nora Whitfield knew this was just the beginning. 3 days after the Charlotte NC trip, Nora Whitfield sat alone at her mother's kitchen table. Sunlight spilled in through the window. Beside it were a half-finished cup of coffee and a legal pad. The house was quiet. Her family was asleep, the first time since they arrived. She would have been having a ball at the reunion under normal circumstances, listening to stories, photographing, watching her nieces giggle over breakfast. But half her thoughts was still on the plane. She was not crazy. The wrath was past. What was left was different. Responsibility the next few years brought Iris a painful truth. Many people get mending and moving on mixed up. These are not exactly the same. Sometimes moving on is kicking the can down the road to someone else to deal with later. And she would not do that. In front of her sat the folder containing all she collected. Number of airport security incidents, names of witnesses, flight details, notes, times, comments, nothing strange, the facts. She would build every successful investigation she would ever worked on facts. This one too will be influenced by facts. At 8:17 that morning, she logged onto her laptop and lodged an official complaint with the airline's Office of Corporate Responsibility. The report is finished, professional, no feeling. She was not exaggerating, no assumptions, no conclusions. She merely told what had occurred. Your boarding pass, please. Unfair treatment, that was the identification that was blown away. Public allegations, the security report, the eyewitnesses. Then she added the accompanying paperwork. She hit send and she was unusually calm, nor relieved. Just chill out. Truth does not have to be dressed up. Truth needs proof. What Iris didn't know was that her report would fall on the desk of someone who immediately grasped the gravity of the issue. For 15 years, Susan Pratt investigated consumer complaints for an airline. The most common problem was delays, dispute about refunds, lost luggage. The staff are a little disrespectful. This case did not feel like the first paragraph. She read it over once, and again, and then a third one. Lunchtime, an internal review was underway. It takes all-day-long work from many divisions to do everything in 24 hours. Staff compliance for business, flight operations, legal problems. The airline was no longer contemplating a complaint. It was a recon. Meanwhile, Captain Charles Hargrove was certain, at least from the outside. When pressed for his statement, he submitted a report which gave a totally different picture. Iris has been acting funny, Bradley added. There was contradiction in the identification of her, he said. He said he had acted for safety grounds. The wording sounded too formal. Occupation professional, okay. It seemed at first sight to be plausible, but old-time detectives know one key fact. You may compose stories. The evidence must be verified. Susan Pratt knew it, so she started comparing timelines, and problems started immediately. Big problems. No discrepancies were identified in airport security data. The passenger data had no remarkable findings. The boarding logs were the same. All official accounts contradicted Bradley's story. The more the detectives looked, the worse things grew. Then came the witnesses. The first interview was with the Rev. Thomas Whitaker. He was 72, no relation to Iris, no personal agenda. There is nothing to invent. His report was correct, steady, inflexible. The woman was fairly respectful on the flight. Did she threaten anybody? No. Did she break orders? No. Did she cause a disturbance? No. The answers came back promptly, one at a time. Easy. Yes. Not good. Then came Monica Reyes, the attorney. When they learned that she had filmed the event as it happened, the investigators' interest sharpened. Teresa saw timestamps, detailed observations, notes of the period. Reverend Graves's narrative did it all. Worse, Charles Hargrove's report was against everything. The disparity between the two versions of events kept growing. Then the detectives interviewed more travelers. The businessman sitting across the aisle, the retired couple, one of the crew. With each interview, another piece was added. A picture more than the sum of its pieces was forming, and that shot was not much like the Bradley story. By the end of the second week, the investigators witnessed something they could not forget. All the independent witnesses testified in the same way. Iris was serene. Iris was still cooperative. Iris never harped. Iris did what was asked. Wow, the consistency was great. Humans rarely tell the same narrative. But the basic facts were the same in every interview. Consistency is important. A lot of weight. Then another surprise changed the entire study. Looking at the passenger records, a compliance officer observed nothing unusual. He knew the name, so very familiar background verification required. The confirmation came some hours later. Nora Whitfield was no ordinary passenger. She was an FBI special agent with over 10 years of expertise in federal investigations. The news traveled quickly across the review staff not because she complained, because it revealed something incredibly ironic. The woman shown as suspect has spent years investigating genuine crime. The woman who raised the alarm over security had spent her career in public safety. The woman who was branded untrustworthy had built a whole career on credibility. The file sat there for a time and they all just stared at it. It was a great contradiction, but it was not Iris's work that most struck them. It was the way she behaved. The normal person in her circumstance would have flashed their ID immediately. Many would have desired to be extraordinary. Many individuals would have used their power to prevent it, and she had done nothing. She was a passenger, respectfully replied, completely complied. Procedures carried out. Let the facts speak for themselves. That one revelation significantly impacted the picture of the whole case for many investigators. Not because I'm an FBI agent, because I choose not to rely on that persona. At the airline's headquarters, Susan Pratt was working on the interim findings. As she reviewed the information, she saw a pattern emerging that she could not ignore. The question of opinion was no longer between a passenger and a captain. The issue was credibility, and credibility was changing. There was one rendering of what happened in each paper. The interviews wore each other down. Each fact contributed in some way to the research. No one has ever challenged Charles Hargrove's assumptions for years. Now he was in charge. It did not matter. Evidence was key. That was a game changer. That afternoon, Karen closed the file and looked out the office window. Planes rolled down the runway. Passengers hurried to gates. Departure flights, arrivals. The world of flying continued on as it always had. Something important was going on up in the meeting room. Though something was beginning to confront a fact it could not escape. Not because some strong man desired it, not because of the newspaper headlines, not from public demand. The facts were adding up. Witness after witness, one document at a time, line by line, and slowly, inevitably, the truth was overpowering the authority that had once tried to extinguish it. The tide was starting to change for the first time since getting on that plane. The story no longer belonged to the captain who had first told it. That was a sign. In fact, unlike preconceptions, does not care about who has the greater rank. 2 weeks into the investigation, the evidence room was no longer a hive of activity. It was filling up with answers. The airline officials were not debating about what had happened on Flight 514 for the first time since the disaster. The facts had already rendered that conversation moot, but they were asking a much meaner question now. How did this happen in the first place? Reports were heaped on a table in a meeting room at business headquarters. Witness statements, security log, internal communications, flight logs, personnel files. The probe had gone much beyond a passenger complaint because every serious investigation reaches a point where the focus shifts. The occurrence is no longer a problem. The problem is the mechanism that permitted the incident to happen. At the far end of the table, Susan Pratt was looking at yet another file on Captain Charles Hargrove. It looked like work at first. Consumer complaint 3 years ago. Zero drama. No headliner. No public consciousness. Just one passenger singled out on a flight. Karen made a new file, then another, and one more. A troubling tendency steadily began to emerge. The complaints were different, yet they were alike. Passengers who thought they were being over-interrogated. Odd questions from passengers. Passengers stated they were treated differently from others around. Most of the instances had been dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Absence of evidence. Miscommunication. Customers' opinion. None of the individual concerns appeared to be serious enough to justify a more detailed assessment. One by one, they all seemed very small. Together, they told a different story. Hide in seclusion. Patterns. So the detectives search for repetition. It can be misunderstood as a criticism. 5 complaints will be addressed. 10 complaints. Responsibility asked for. By late afternoon, detectives had unearthed numerous prior complaints about Bradley's behavior. None had approached the height of the present disaster, but they painted a picture the leadership could no longer ignore. Warning flags had been flying for years. They were not linked. None stepped back far enough to see the complete canvas. Now the picture was crystal clear. Charles Hargrove sat in a quiet office, waiting for another interview across town. His confidence, which had always been there, was starting to crack. Not that anyone had accused him of it, because the evidence would not play ball with his story. Every witness statement was a blow to his report. With every paper, new questions arose. In each review, another discrepancy was revealed. 22 years of experience had kept him safe, but the facts could not be dismissed as experience. A senior investigator put another paper in front of him. Many passengers mentioned the same behavior. Why is that? Bradley shifted in his chair. His answer was less confident than it had been. Because when reality keeps proving you wrong, clarity becomes difficult. For the first time in years, he was looking at something he did not know. Consequences. No penalty for an error. We all err, consequences of non-recognition. Elsewhere, another tough talk was in progress. Across from her sat Diane Schaefer, a flight attendant and part of the airline's compliance crew. Colleen had never ripped up a card, unlike Bradley, never accused a passenger of something, never filed false complaint, but cops kept asking the same question. Why did not you do something? The question disturbed her sleep, because she knew what it was already. Fearfulness, fear no risk, fear of authority, fear of opposing an elder, fear of conflict. Scared to get it wrong. The same fear that silences uncounted good people every day. Colleen looked at the table. Something didn't feel right. I knew it. The words were in a mild tone, painfully slow. The investigator nodded his head. What's the matter? She looked elsewhere, and for some seconds she was unable to answer. The truth of that made her blush. It felt easier not to communicate at the time. Safer. Simpler. The problem was that convenience often came at a price, and someone else generally pays. Colleen understood pain felt worse than punishment. She had seen injustice, and she had chosen to keep quiet. Not that she approved, because she stopped, but that distinction was essential. But it did not free him from responsibility. A week later, the airline's leaders met to deliver their final judgment. The room was hushed when the findings were presented. No speeches on the show, no emotional arguments, only evidence. Theatricality is seldom necessary in handling facts. There was no getting away from the conclusion. Captain Charles Hargrove had violated corporation policy. He had built a name for himself. He would misused his power. He had supplied misleading information on an official review. Above all, he had abused the trust of someone with responsibility for hundreds of people. Trust is the basis of the art of flying. Pilots are responsible for the safety of the passengers. Airlines realize that the pilot is the face of the company. Pilots' lead and crew relies on them. And once you break that trust, it can only be repaired by experience, and the vote was unanimous. Charles Hargrove has been sacked. 22 years hung on one vote, not in a single flight, because one flight uncovered a problem that has been there for years. Elsewhere, Colleen was told of disciplinary action and retraining. Then there was a pause for a moment. The company admitted a brutal truth. Silence will not hurt directly, but quiet can let the evil continue. But the biggest decision came after the punishment. One is chastised, yet the duty is not complete. Accountability only important when it improves systems. That was the lesson that airline management finally learned. The policy changes were accepted immediately. Crew members received further training on prejudice awareness and treatment of passengers. Employees who witnessed misbehavior were provided with new ways to report it. Complaints of discrimination by passengers would be subject to mandatory secondary review. It would be best to save the witness statements. Escalation processes would be improved. None of these changes would reverse what had happened to Iris. Nope, not a damn thing. But they could save somebody else, and sometimes that's all. Not rewriting history, improving the future. A few days later, Iris received a personal call from Susan Pratt. Those were the findings, she added. The consequences, changes to policies, fin de l'enquête. When she was finished, she hesitated. Then she asked, was there anything else you wanted to get out of this process? Iris thought for a moment. Karen looked at the answer in wonder. No, not bucks. No advertising. No payback. Accountability. End of story. That had always been plenty. Iris learned something many spend a lifetime learning. Justice is not retribution. Revenge is causing someone pain. Justice means making things fair. One glances back, the other is looking ahead. A few moments after the call, Iris sat in silence. The living room window let in the afternoon sunlight. Outside, the world went on. Cars went past. Kids were playing, and life carried on. Bradley, she mused, not with any joy, not loathe, but with a special kind of sorrow. Somewhere along the road, a man who had learned to fly had stopped learning to listen. And that failure had cost him everything. Then she thought about Reverend Graves, Dunlap, Teresa, the businessmen next door, the sentries, even Colleen, those who had been forced to pick. Some spoke, some were reluctant, Some did learn. All of them become part of the reality. Iris looked out the window and knew the story was never about winning. It was about responsibility. The duty to tell the truth. The obligation to do something when things are wrong. The problem of designing systems robust enough to self-correct. And true justice isn't measured by who falls. It is measured by the rise that comes following. 6 weeks later, the case was over and Nora Whitfield was in another airport. Not that she wanted to go through those experiences again. She was not trying to prove anything. Life continues. Flights keep on flying. People go places. And even the most difficult chapters become history. The terminal resembled any airport in the United States. Suitcases on wheels glided over the glistening flooring. Families were running for the gates. Business travelers carried coffee mugs, laptops, voices blasted over the loudspeakers throughout the building. To the world around her, it was just another day. To Iris, it was something else. Experiment. No courage. Zero tolerance. Of faith. Trust is delicate. Most of us think that trust dies in a spectacular moment. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, it just fades away quietly. One let down at a time. One expectation at a time crushed. Another insult for nothing. And it is more difficult to repair than to break time. She was at the gate, waiting to cross, when her phone vibrated. There would have been another email. The sender was the executive office of the airline. She knew what was coming. This is the final letter we've had on the calendar for weeks, but she broke it. Lawyers did not write it. This was not corporate speak. That was not shirking responsibility. That was just terrific. The letter verified it. Hetero. Yes. None. No experience needed. This is not your fault. The airline was sorry for the treatment she received. It takes the leaders to fail. It admitted errors and oversight. But most importantly, it dealt with the human impact. That was more important than a lot of people think. Policies can change. Employees are liable to disciplinary action. Procedures can be phrased differently. But sometimes the fix begins with an institution saying, "We were wrong." And we know why that mattered. Iris read the letter again. She shut off the phone silently. She had no delight, no win, not a sense of victory, nothing except peace. It was never about beating anybody. They kept the truth alive, and it did. The effects of the probe continued to be felt throughout the airline across the country. On the training front, new programs were under progress. Developed leadership workshops, their reporting changed. Crew were encouraged to disclose issues without fear of reprisal. Staff had been trained for years in dealing with passengers. Now the children were starting to question assumptions as well. It was a sharp contrast. Rules are a means to regulate conduct. Culture shifts awareness. Now the airline knew it. Not because some PR men told them to, for proof has instructed them so. A lot of individuals participating in the investigation had learnt their own lessons. The Reverend Rev. Thomas Whitaker spoke about the flight often in his sermons. Not that he went into details, but it was a reminder of what he'd been preaching for decades. When it's difficult to speak up, that's when character is. Many think moral courage is a matter of heroic deeds. Generally not. It usually takes a sentence. Question, a reluctance to look away. And that one stayed with him. It was not the same message Monica Reyes had sent. She'd often conversed to the junior associates in her legal firm. She told them that documentation was vital. The facts are the thing. God is in the details. Rarely do people realize which moment might matter in the end. That is why we need consistent integrity. Her flight notes were nothing at that. Later they entered into actuality, and frequently truth is simple things at right time. But of all men, First Officer Ryan Castillo had changed more. For weeks he was plagued by the memory of that flight. Not that he participated because he quit. The others felt the need to establish a distinction. It mattered little to him. He should have spoken up earlier, he knew. He knew he should have asked questions about what he observed. And that was a disturbing conclusion. Usually a few months later, Derek stood in front of a room full of new pilots and gave a leadership seminar. He told us, no names, no secret behind closed doors, a lesson simply authority is not wisdom. Infallibility is not an experience. And regard for a superior is not a replacement for respect for what is right, he said, and the room fell silent. For that was evident to all. Aviation depends on people who are willing to critique inaccuracy, not merely technological errors. Humans too. The talk was done, and Derek felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not that the history had altered, that he learned. Next, Iris. Then one Monday morning she was back in the FBI field office. Immediately she heard the usual sounds. Phones ringing. Discussion hall. Files being investigated. The ordered chaos of people working through the obstacles. A young agent walked up to me. How did Charlotte NC fare? Iris grinned. It seemed an almost difficult question to answer. How do you sum up all that happened? The family reunion, the flight, the inquiry, the takeaway, the natives, the facts, and she supplied the simplest answer. It was unforgettable. The younger detective smiled. I will see that as a good sign. Again, Iris smiled and was silent. There are no words for some sensations. That afternoon, she sat at her workstation and opened the file on the new case. See more results, another fact-finding mission, another chance to help someone who needs justice. It was just another day in many respects. And that was possibly the most important thing of all. It did not make any difference to her. It had just reminded her why she was an investigator to begin with. Justice has never been a race. Justice was not standing. Justice was never about the right against the wrong. Justice let truth have its say. Through the window of her job, she saw airplanes go by across the sky. Little silver creatures shooting across the metropolis, among strangers. Between the stories, passengers sat with strangers in the sky. Some would remember the names, the majority wouldn't, yet all travelers had the same hope. Treated with dignity, same rights for me, treat me like a human being. And maybe that was the moral of the whole affair. Not him, not the field, not the headlines that didn't. The lesson was easier. Power requires your focus. But maybe compliance is the rule of the day. Titles are important. But none of those things tells us who we really are. That's a character issue. And on a flight that started with prejudice and ended with accountability. One reality survived well past all else had faded. There is no prestige up there at 30,000 feet. Yes, it does. This anecdote teaches us that we are sometimes more insulted by assumptions than we realize, and that true respect can never be established by the looks, title, or status of a person. If we see something wrong, our voice matters. Sometimes being silent and retaining your truth is more powerful than being upset when something unjust happens. The fact is, we all get to decide. We may be kind. We get to be just. We get to be brave. Be respectful. Stand up for what's right. And don't underestimate the impact of simply doing the right thing. People remember character, not where they end up.